In episode 101 of Bullet Heaven, we took a look at R-Type Dimensions, a faithful remake of R-Type 1 and 2 for the PlayStation 3. The R-Type series as a whole is one of the toughest game series ever devised, with a purposefully slow, inherently difficult structure that is meant to test the patience and memory of its player. Following the release of the R-Types compilation, which itself contained R-Type 1 and 2 on Sony's original PlayStation, Agetec would publish IRM's R-Type Delta, which marked the series' first foray into 3D graphics for the then latest hardware. It also introduced a number of enhancements not yet seen in the series. Let's take a closer look. On the outset of the game, players can take control of one of three vastly different ships. Though they all control identically, each has very different features in terms of firepower and force types. The classic R9 Delta has a typical force. Its firepower mimics that of the ships in R-Type 1 and 2. The new RX Albatross has a shockwave cannon and the tentacle force. As the force grows in size, its arms stretch and flex, allowing players to cover or attack with greater range. Finally, the R13 Cerberus has an electric riot cannon and the anchor force. This force can grapple onto and damage enemies until they are destroyed or the force is recalled. There is also a damaging tether between the R13 and the force, allowing for some creative destruction. Players move their ship with typical 8-way control. Unlike R-Type 1 and 2 though, Delta allows players to change the craft speed to suit the various conditions by way of the L1 and L2 buttons. Slower for more precision, faster to quickly get out of the way, or through a timed gap more efficiently. At any rate, there's a fairly comfortable speed for most players somewhere within the 4 speeds available. Shots are fired with the square button when tapped and charged when held. Each ship has a cannon that can be charged through twice for faster or huge enhanced damage depending on the situation. There are no shot power-ups in this game. What you have on the R-Type of your choosing is what you'll have at game end, or game over. Instead, the force can be powered up to deal some pretty hefty damage. Rapid shots are also mapped to R2 and Circle by default. Pickups for the force will be one of 3 colors, dropped by red POW armor units. Red weapons are direct shots, blue lasers are lasers of varying type, whether homing or reflective, etc., and yellow enables a wide-range weapon. The force itself can be powered up to a level of 3 and can not only be launched at enemies, but also mounted on the front or rear of the R-Type, which is handy especially since they're indestructible and they can shield players from most enemy shots. They also have variable behavior depending on the R-Type. The Albatross's tentacle force, for example, will chase down and shoot directly at enemies and emplacements. Additional pickups drop from blue power armor units in the form of defensive indestructible bits, and missiles also boost the defensive and offensive power of the selected R-Type. If a player dies though, all power-ups are lost. When the force makes contact with an enemy, boss, or emplacement, it gets what's called a dose, indicated by a gauge by the cannon charge meter. When the dose reaches 100%, a massive bomb known as the Delta attack can be unleashed by the triangle button. In a pinch, this attack can clear the screen when it is particularly crowded, but seems best used for stage-end bosses. Each different ship has its own Delta attack. Now, undeniably, R-Type Delta is pretty difficult. Getting through the game is going to take a lot of practice and memorization, even on easy with its 5 credits. There are really just going to be times when a player can just run into a string of bad timing, and with checkpoints in place, it can be extremely frustrating when 3 of your 5 starting credits have been chewed away by one small finicky part in an otherwise tame stage. Speaking of checkpoints, checkpoints. There's just nothing worse than that feeling that you've made some decent progress only to die and get shot right back to the beginning of the stage. That. Of course, by design, R-Type Delta is a game that's designed to be played for survival. But while there's only one loop to the game, there are also no extends either, making things particularly brutal. Getting through on the initial 5 supplied credits feels fair enough for game completion given this, though most would consider a 1cc truly beating it, and good luck with that. For everyone else, extended playtime leads to more credits to hopefully get further from checkpoint to checkpoint and see the end. With that said, each of R-Type Delta's 7 stages is lengthy, so there's definitely plenty to play here, but the stage design feels very crowded, especially in Stage 4. Everything always feels just a bit too claustrophobic at all times with your ship's large size and the very close perspective in the game as a whole. Is it fun though? Well, it's certainly solid and the mechanics work really well on the whole, but R-Type Delta's heavy reliance on memorization and steep difficulty makes it a pretty shallow game when you really start digging. Sure, with enough time a player will learn the whole process to avoid hazards back to front, but it's super frustrating while you do it, especially without an engaging score system. R-Type Delta is definitely not for everyone, but for those looking for a hardcore survival shmup that doesn't get easily frustrated, well, here you go. R-Type Delta lacks almost everything in terms of sophistication when it comes to building up points. No chains, particularly fancy scoring techniques, or even an end-stage boost exists for the score. No extends also means that there's no real incentive to try to get the most points as quickly as possible. Players score points by destroying enemies and emplacements. That's pretty much it. Collecting any sort of power-ups like force, missile, or bits does nothing for the score even at full power like many other shooting games. There are also no secret score points in specific. However, a very slight score is awarded for hitting things with the force. It's a tiny bonus, but a bonus nonetheless. Despite being the most basic scoring system of all time, one neat aspect of the game is how it keeps track of a player's score stage by stage and displays each result after clearing each subsequent level. An indicator will appear if a previous record has been beaten as well. If a player continues, all previous entries by stage are cleared off though, so only a 1cc will show the results of all stages at once when the game is completed. All in all, the scoring in R-Type serves no real competitive point, since anyone can get a high score simply by shooting as much as they can. As such, scoring does nothing to enhance the replay value of the game. R-Type Delta's presentation is probably its strongest suit, but this was a game that was made in 1999 for a system made in 1995, so there are obviously going to be shortcomings in terms of its visuals. In particular, the polygon models are simple, with nothing in the line of anti-aliasing to smooth things out. The textures on these models are often chunky and pixelated as well, which comes as no surprise. This is the original PlayStation after all. A lot of the textures on background elements have a tendency to warp as well, which is another common issue with the PlayStation 1 in specific. The stages are all quite dark as well. There are some really cool segments, but overall there isn't a ton to look at in R-Type Delta as a result. By contrast, Einhunter had much better visuals which, while most stages were still darker than others, at least came through with clear, sharp imagery and good lighting and texturing. But at the same time, there are a couple of details you can catch if you look closely. Using the wave cannon causes a recoil in the player's ship. The huge walking fortress in Stage 3 causes cracks in the lake ice it steps on. Neat lighting occurs underwater. The design for all of the enemies and bosses are way less, phallic overall, which is also a pretty big bonus. R-Type Delta also has a pretty great OST, which gives each stage a strong personality and atmosphere. Some tracks are even dynamic, changing in real time depending on whether the player's ship is above or below water, for example. The sound effects used are less great though. While most of them definitely have that R-Type vibe, some effects seem a little silly sounding, like when power-ups appear. Some explosions sound identical to the ones in Nintendo's Star Fox as well. At one point, sounding just like player death in Nintendo's much earlier game. Weird. Other touches to R-Type are pretty great though. As the game starts, players' registered names are displayed along with their settings superimposed on a heart monitor. It gives a neat personal touch to the game that is not especially common. Pretty cool. Rounding off R-Type Delta's presentation, a war record allows players to view various gameplay stats, unlock and view various notes as kind of an achievement system, as well as unlocking various new backgrounds to be used in the main menu. Neat. Of course, these extras are only unlocked as players do better in the game, so this could lead to a fair amount of replay in the end after all. There are also unlockable craft and various other features that become available with specific conditions. So, how does R-Type Delta stack up? Let's take a look. R-Type Delta controls very well for what it is, but can sometimes feel a bit fidgety in its claustrophobic stages and tight spaces. R-Type has a steep challenge, but ultimately boils down to memorization. Checkpoints make each death excruciating. With 7 stages and a host of unlockables, there's a decent amount of content to get through in terms of length, but a lack of an engaging score system hurts R-Type Delta's replay. Chunky, texture warped, and dark, even for the PS1, R-Type Delta's visuals work, but not as well as others like Einhunter. R-Type Delta has a great OST and most of the effects work really well, but a couple of the effects sound more like they belong in a children's cartoon rather than an apocalyptic battle with the Bido. In terms of ingenuity, the Delta attack system works super well and the extra ships are a nice touch, but the rest of R-Type Delta is startlingly basic and painfully crowded. The North American version of R-Type Delta goes for about $130 on average complete. Japanese copies are a much more paltry $50 or $60 or so. For players without a Japanese system, the cost of value of this particular title isn't very good. Make sure to buy as low as possible. R-Type Delta has me pretty conflicted. On the one hand, the gameplay is solid. On the other hand, its super heavy-handed difficulty will surely have players giving up long before seeing the end of the game. Is it fun? That definitely depends who you ask. It definitely didn't jive with me. I actually kind of hated it. But in the end, based purely on its technical merits alone, R-Type Delta gets a 3.75 out of 5. You can get a copy of R-Type Delta at auction at varying prices depending on region and completeness. Can you believe that the Wii U Pokken controller totally worked when playing this game on a PS3? That was definitely unexpected. Speaking of surprises, here are a few other episodes of Bullet Heaven that took us completely by surprise. You know what else is a pretty neat surprise? Getting new patrons. If you'd like to support Bullet Heaven, become a patron on Patreon for as little as $1 per episode. All proceeds go directly back into production. We even have a card for it in the corner. Well then, let's clear the board for December's Viewer's Choice. Aeroblasters and Automatius both tied with 29% of the vote each, so Automatius gets the boot for being on 2 polls in a row. Joining the fray, Legendary Wings for the NES and our first potential Wii entry, Ocean Commander. As always, vote by way of the card in the top right-hand corner of the screen.